My name is Juan Carlos Ramirez, I am 32 years old, and for a part of my life, I was convinced that trust was not only the foundation of every significant relationship but also the moral compass that guides us through chaos. I grew up believing that if one was a person of integrity, if one acted with honesty and loyalty, life would eventually reward that silent commitment to the truth. Until recently, my life seemed like it was taken from a carefully designed postcard. I was a senior project manager at a leading software development company in the heart of Madrid. I had a team under my charge, worked with cutting-edge technologies, and earned a six-figure salary that allowed me to enjoy a comfortable existence. I lived in a spacious, elegant apartment in the Salamanca neighborhood, hardwood floors, large windows with views of a tree-lined street, an open kitchen where I loved to prepare dinners on Sunday nights. On the surface, I had it all, but what I valued most was not the money or the professional prestige, it was the sense of emotional stability I had so carefully built. I was engaged to Laura Diaz, a woman I believed I knew down to the very last corner of her soul. We had been together for 2 years and had already chosen the wedding date, the venue, even the song for our first dance. I was sure she was the one. There was no doubt, no shadow, no suspicion in my heart. And then there was my father, Don Alberto Ramirez, a name that in the Madrid real estate world evoked respect, results, and a reputation forged over more than 3 decades. But to me, he wasn't just a man or a prominent professional figure. He was my silent hero, the man who taught me to tie my shoelaces, to look people in the eye when shaking their hand, to never promise anything I couldn't deliver. He had been my protective shadow during childhood, my guide during adolescence, and a companion for eternal chats in adulthood. He and my mother, Carmen, had been together for 35 years. And I'm not just talking about chronological time, I'm talking about shared dinners, Sundays in the countryside, a complicity in their gazes. Their relationship, at least from my perspective, was a masterpiece of affection and patience. They held hands when they walked, sent each other loving messages during the day, and still laughed together watching silly movies on Saturday nights. To me, their love was confirmation that authentic commitment was still possible in a world saturated with haste, distractions, and hollow promises. When I introduced Laura to them, my father welcomed her with open arms, literally. I remember that first meeting at the El Paraguas restaurant. He smiled at her with genuine warmth. He asked about her family, her work, her personal tastes. He wasn't the type of father who tested my partners. On the contrary, he always said that trusting was a choice, not a reward. Laura was 30 years old, a marketing coordinator at a boutique agency in Chumbery, intelligent, with a sharp wit that disarmed me, and a curiosity about the world that made me feel alive. We shared simple but intense passions, hikes in the Sierra de Guadarrama, endless coffees on small terraces, and eternal debates about which was the best Neapolitan pizza in Madrid. I defended a place in Lavapiés, she swore by one in Malesana. We met on July 4, 2022, at a barbecue organized by some American friends. It was a hot afternoon, smelling of grilled meat and cold beers. She was dressed in white with a smile that seemed to hold the entire summer in its light. We talked for hours, and at the end of the night, when we said goodbye, I knew, without knowing how I knew, that it wouldn't be the last time. 3 months later, I was sure I wanted to grow old by her side. My mother, Carmen, adored her. She said she had a good heart and a laugh that filled the house. And my father never tired of repeating that I was lucky, that you don't find women like her twice in a lifetime. On Sundays, we all had lunch together. Paella, wine, anecdotes. Laura integrated into my family as if she had always been there. We celebrated Christmas, birthdays, even Champions League nights at home. She would sit next to my father, they would laugh together, discuss the best method for investing in real estate. I looked at them with pride, with gratitude. The wedding was to be in October at the Church of San Antonio de los Alemans. We had also booked the Museum of History of Madrid for the reception. Everything was planned with Swiss precision, 150 guests, a cocktail bar with aged bourbon, a jazz trio that would play Sinatra standards. We even had a light choreography for the first dance, something elegant, classy. I had chosen Miguel, my college roommate, almost a brother, as my best man, and Laura's sister, Sylvia, would be her maid of honor. The restaurant Casa Lucio had the rehearsal dinner prepared, and we had booked a luxury suite at a hotel in Tenerife for the honeymoon. Everything fit. It was the puzzle of a perfect life. But the most beautiful puzzles often hide broken pieces beneath the surface. The night before the wedding, the Madrid air had that autumnal scent, a mix of nostalgia and promise. I was staying with my father at the Palace Hotel, a tradition he himself had suggested months earlier as a symbolic way to share the last hours of my single life among men. We had booked 2 adjoining suites, spacious, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and an elegant warmth that seemed designed for memory. While Laura was staying with my mother and the bridesmaids at a different hotel, honoring that custom of not seeing each other before the ceremony, my father and I were sharing one last dinner together, courtesy of room service. It was one of those quiet nights when everything seemed to be in its place. We sat at the small table by the window, surrounded by the muffled murmur of the city, watching the lights of Madrid twinkle like stars at ground level. On the table, plates of sirloin, a bottle of Rioja he had brought especially, and a pile of papers with the guest seating chart. We laughed as we organized who would sit with whom, avoiding family squabbles and pairing the more talkative guests. He, with his characteristic precision for details, was drawing lines, crossing out names, making suggestions with a smile on his lips. "Don't you dare seat your Aunt Marta near Cousin Julian," he said with a laugh, "unless you want a political argument right between the appetizers and the main course." I laughed too, not at the joke, but because in that moment, I felt lucky, proud to share that moment with my father. I thought this was the kind of memory you keep forever, that one day I might tell my son that his grandfather was there the night before my wedding, fine-tuning the details with affection, as if it were our own ritual. But some nights don't end as one expects. There are unsaid words that float in the air like omens, and there are betrayals that are brewed amidst laughter like a shadow in the middle of the light. Around 10:30, my father stood up, saying he was going to the bathroom. He left his iPhone on the table next to his half-finished cup of coffee. It wasn't my intention to look at it, I swear. But a soft, barely perceptible vibration caught my attention. The screen lit up briefly, revealing a message notification. I don't know if it was fatigue, the wine, or simply chance, but my eyes drifted towards it without thinking. In clear letters, on a dark background, I read something that made no sense and yet explained everything. "Thanks for an unforgettable night, Alberto. I can't get the thought of your lips exploring every part of my body out of my mind. I can't wait to do it again. You're incredible. P.S. Our story will be our secret." The sender was Laura. Time literally stood still. My senses shut down as if someone had unplugged the cables of my perception. I only saw that screen, that sentence, that signature at the end, and a second later, the image that accompanied the message. The two of them together. In a hotel room, explicit intimacy, smiles between white sheets, a photo taken carelessly but clear enough to erase any glimmer of doubt. Everything collapsed in an instant. The woman to whom I was going to promise eternal love in less than 12 hours had been with my father, the man who taught me to respect, to protect, to not lie. The same one who, hours before, had told me he was proud of me, that he admired me as a man and as a professional. And there was the proof, cruel, indisputable. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't a night of drinking out of control. It was a carefully executed betrayal. The photo's metadata, why did I even look? I don't know, revealed it had been taken the night before, while I was at my bachelor party with my friends. My hands were trembling, but my mind remained strangely lucid, as if my brain, trained by years of meticulous work, knew that in the face of a system error, the first thing to do is save evidence, protect data, assess the damage. I took my phone, took screenshot after screenshot, and sent them to an encrypted server I had for sensitive work projects. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't break anything. I sat in silence, looking at the table where, minutes before, we had drawn the map of our happiness. And when I heard the sound of the toilet flushing and my father's footsteps returning, I took a deep breath. He came back with a calm expression, oblivious to the storm that had just been unleashed. He sat down, took a sip of coffee, and said, "All set, eh? Tomorrow's going to be a great day, son." "Yes," I replied. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." He patted my shoulder and smiled. He wished me good night and went to his room, closing the door gently. And I stayed there, sitting, feeling the known world dissolve. When the door closed behind him, a dense silence filled the room. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a quiet night. It was a thick one, like a heavy fog that envelopes your soul and doesn't let you breathe. The kind of silence you feel when reality no longer fits with anything you knew. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands still trembling, trying to get my heart rate down. I breathed deeply, slowly, as if with each inhalation I could contain the tide of thoughts crowding my mind. A part of me wanted to run, another wanted to vomit, another simply didn't want to accept what I had just discovered. Because it wasn't just an infidelity, it was a total demolition of my foundations, a double betrayal, the most absurd, the most unthinkable, the most cruel. I replayed in my mind, one by one, all the recent moments, the dinners at home with my parents and Laura, the private jokes between them, that new perfume she had suddenly started wearing, the compliment my father had unreservedly given her that night, that scent looks incredible on you. At the time, it seemed like an innocent comment, a tasteful compliment. Now, it revealed itself as another crack in the facade I hadn't seen. The work getaways, the calls that would cut off when I got close, my father's unexpected trips to Zaragoza, right when Laura said she was swamped with work for new clients. The pieces were fitting together, but not as I had believed. They had assembled their own puzzle, a parallel one in which I was the only one who didn't know I was the last to find out. I, who made a living detecting system errors, vulnerabilities in projects, minimal deviations in task flows, had been unable to detect the most obvious flaw in my own life. And yet, something in me, a cold, analytical part, activated. An inner voice, hardened by thousands of hours of professional crises, spoke to me with clarity: this isn't fixed with shouting. This is solved with strategy. I stood up, walked barefoot on the carpeted room as if seeking oxygen in the movement. I poured myself a glass of water. I looked out the window at the nocturnal profile of Madrid and thought, if they planned this in secret, I will plan my response in silence. The first decision was simple. Say nothing. Not that night, not immediately. I was going to let everything proceed as if nothing had happened. I was going to look both of them in the eye during the ceremony and pretend, smile. I was even going to let them believe they would get away with it, that their lie would live on. And when the right moment came, the truth would hit them like an unstoppable wave. I turned on my laptop and transferred all the captured content to a private server. I protected it with double encryption. I uploaded the images, the messages, the metadata. Then I created a basic, simple web page with a white background and black text, no visual noise, no sensationalism, just the facts, the evidence, what was necessary. A file as brutal as it was clean. I created a QR code that redirected directly to that website. I designed it as if it were part of the wedding favors. Something modern, elegant, a surprise for the guests. I chose the message carefully, scanned for a special surprise from the bride and groom. Something that would arouse curiosity without raising suspicion. Something everyone would want to see, especially during a long ceremony with phones silenced but active. It was already early morning, but I didn't feel sleepy, only a furious clarity. I went to the hotel's business center, printed 200 small cards with the sober, professional design, nothing flashy, something any modern couple would include as a wedding keepsake. Back in the room, I sat down again in front of the computer and, on instinct, opened the folder of my childhood photos. I saw pictures of me with my father at the park, at the stadium, at my graduation. In each one, he smiled with the sincere pride of a father accompanying his son's steps. And I believed him, I loved him, I wanted to be like him. And now, all of that was something else. It wasn't erased, it didn't disappear, but it transformed, as if someone had changed the context of each image. As if all those moments were now false memories, adulterated by a silent betrayal that ran through them invisibly. At 2 a.m., I picked up my phone and called Rebecca Soto, my trusted lawyer. I didn't hesitate. I needed someone sane, external, legally prepared, to hear what was about to happen. She answered on the third ring with a hoarse but firm voice. "Juan, what's wrong? Are you okay?" And then I told her everything. "Juan." Rebecca's voice broke for just a moment. "Are you sure? I have the proof. I saw it with my own eyes. There's no room for error." There was a silence on the other end of the line. I know her well. It wasn't doubt, it was containment. The legal mind processing the facts, anticipating scenarios, watching my steps even on the most absurd night of my life. "I'm so sorry," she finally said with a warm, human tone, very different from the calls about clauses and signatures. "But I'm glad you're thinking with a clear head. That's what's going to save you." I told her everything. The QR code, the website, the printed cards, every step, every idea. She listened without interrupting me, not with morbid curiosity, not with empty surprise, but with the kind of precise attention that only professionals who have seen the rawest side of human nature can give. "You are not signing anything tomorrow," was the first thing she stated forcefully. "Not a marriage contract, not a symbolic certificate, not any registration. As much as the ceremony is religious, not a single document should be signed." "Of course," I replied. "I have no intention of legally sealing anything with that woman. Not a single letter. And as for the rest," she continued, "what you're planning is not only legal, it's brilliant. It's your content, your event, your truth. No one can stop you from sharing it." We talked for over an hour. She suggested I document everything with timestamps, that I protect the data as if it were valuable intellectual property, because it was. She reminded me calmly and firmly that everything I would do that day would be recorded not only in the memory of the attendees but in the history of my own life. She spoke to me of dignity, of justice, of impact. And then she did something I didn't expect. "I'll be there, Juan," she said, among the guests, discreetly. "If anything gets complicated, I'll be ready to intervene. Sometimes the truth needs legal backup, or just a friendly look from the crowd." I hung up the call feeling less alone, stronger. Not because the situation was any less painful, but because there was someone who validated what I was feeling, who assured me that my reaction was not excessive, that the surgical strategy one was weaving was not madness, but a response worthy of the betrayal. It was past 3 a.m. The hotel was completely silent. I walked to the window again. The city seemed asleep, indifferent to the war being waged inside me. The lights of Granvia twinkled in the distance like beacons in a sea of uncertainty. And in that moment, I understood it with clarity. What I was about to do was not for revenge, not entirely. It was for justice, to clear my name, to not let them bury me alive under a lie constructed by the two pillars of my world. At 5, I surrendered to exhaustion. I slept little. A heavy sleep, filled with fragmented images, Laura's face, my father's laugh, the church full of blurry faces. I woke with the first ray of light seeping through the curtains. The day had come. I took a long shower. The hot water helped to steady me, to wash away something more than the sweat of the previous night. I shaved carefully. I dressed in the tuxedo that had been delivered just 2 days before, custom-made by a tailor in the Salamanca neighborhood who had served me with a knowing smile and words of good luck. I looked at myself carefully in the mirror, and for the first time in hours, I saw something I didn't expect to find. Serenity. It wasn't feigned calm, it was resolution. The kind of peace you find not when everything is okay, but when you accept that you are going to do what you must, regardless of the outcome. By 11, I was at the church. San Antonio de los Alemans looked like it did in the postcards, golden columns, Baroque frescoes, white flowers lined up with perfect symmetry. It all seemed like something out of a fairy tale, but I knew the truth. That altar would not be the stage for a union, but for a revelation. The guests began to arrive. Impeccable suits, formal gowns, smiles of contained emotion. My mother, Carmen, arrived radiant in her navy blue dress, greeting everyone with that discreet elegance that characterized her. She had no idea what she was about to face. No one did. And that hurt, but it was also necessary. I saw my father chatting with the first guests. He smiled, shook hands, joked about the traffic. Nothing on his face indicated the guilt he was carrying. Or maybe it did, but I could no longer read him the same way. The mask was so well placed it seemed authentic. Laura arrived minutes later. She looked spectacular. A classic white dress, her hair up in an elegant bun, subtle makeup. She walked with confidence, greeted people, laughed, hugged old friends. To my eyes, every gesture of hers had a false echo, an artifice. And yet, no one else noticed, only me, perhaps only Rebecca, who had already discreetly positioned herself among the guests, as we had agreed. She approached me, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "I can't wait to be your wife." And right then, I knew. The moment was near. Everything was ready. The interior of the church was a theater of expectations. The guests filled every pew with a mixture of enthusiasm and solemnity. The murmur of conversations merged with the soft music of the string quartet playing in a corner, enveloping the nave in an almost surreal atmosphere. For everyone, it was the most important day of my life. For me, it was the beginning of the reconstruction of the truth. From my position at the altar, I could clearly observe every gesture, every smile. My best man, Miguel, patted me on the back encouragingly, convinced I was nervous for the usual reasons, the commitment, the emotion, the enormity of the moment. Laura's sister, Sylvia, couldn't stop wiping away tears of happiness with an embroidered handkerchief. And my mother, sitting in the front row, radiated that silent peace that only mothers have when they feel everything is in order. But everything was about to break. The wedding planner, Julieta, moved through the church with the precision of a professional choreographer. We had already spoken. I had told her that those cards with the QR code were a small digital gift for the guests, a modern trend, a kind of virtual time capsule, I had told her in a calm, almost amused voice. She smiled, pleased to be part of an event with such thoughtful details. She began to distribute the cards among the attendees with delicacy, as if they were special keepsakes printed with love. No one found it strange. We live in a world where everything is scanned, shared, digitized. No one imagined that what they were about to scan would be the demolition of a collective lie. I watched, measured the time, counted the seconds. The ceremony began. Father Manuel, a man with a serene voice and a compassionate gaze, opened with the classic words about love, respect, the sacred union of marriage. His voice resonated between the golden walls, but my ears were attuned to another symphony, the discreet whispers of those who were already beginning to scan. The first was Uncle Mario, a naturally curious man, always the first to try a new app, to scan a digital menu. I saw him point his camera at the code. Then his face changed. From a smile to bewilderment, from bewilderment to horror. He turned to his wife, showed her the screen, she covered her mouth. Then came my cousin Andrea, then David, my boss, who turned pale as if he had just seen a corpse. The code spread like a silent virus among the pews. No one said anything out loud yet, but the unease was growing like a wave that couldn't be stopped. The glances were changing, the atmosphere too. The murmur was different now. Guests passed phones from hand to hand, their eyes wide, as if what they were seeing was unreal. The most incredible thing is that all of this was happening in parallel to a ceremony that continued its course as if nothing was wrong. Laura was by my side, calm, serene, unsuspecting. She looked at Father Manuel with that sweet expression of attention she had practiced so well. In her mind, everything was going perfectly. In mine, the time was approaching its exact moment. Then something more powerful than any word happened. Mercedes, Laura's aunt, showed her phone to the bride's mother. She looked at it, and her expression changed in seconds. First, she frowned, then she squinted as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Finally, she let out a small, choked cry and covered her face with both hands. My mother soon received her card too. I saw her looking so beautiful, so moved. Her smile, that soft gesture of maternal satisfaction, vanished instantly when she scanned the code. I watched as her eyes read, as her expression transformed into pain. A deep, heartbreaking pain, as if the world were crumbling beneath her feet. That was the moment that hurt me the most of all, and yet, I didn't tremble. I knew I couldn't waver. Not now. My father, sitting a few meters away, began to get restless. He looked around in bewilderment, seeing how his friends, his colleagues, his own relatives were looking at him differently. The smiles had disappeared, the conversations were now urgent whispers. The looks that were once of admiration had turned to rejection, surprise, indignation. He leaned towards my mother, said something in her ear, but she pulled away sharply, looking at him as if she didn't recognize him. Her eyes were filled with tears and rage. It was then that Father Manuel reached the turning point. His voice rose. As tradition marks, if anyone can show a valid reason why Juan Carlos and Laura should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Silence. Absolute silence. But it wasn't the usual silence of a wedding, it was something else. It was the contained tension of 150 people who knew something the bride and groom were still pretending not to know. And then I took a step forward, extended my hand, and took the microphone calmly. Yes, I said with a firm voice, without trembling, without anger. I have something to say. The entire church held its breath. I held the microphone between my fingers as if it were a sacred artifact. The echo of my own voice still floated among the Baroque columns as I slowly turned towards Laura. Her eyes searched mine, confused. A frown line appeared between her eyebrows. Her smile trembled, and then she understood. It wasn't immediate, but it was visible. The initial surprise, the incomprehension, the bewilderment, and finally, the terror. That pure terror that is born when a house of cards begins to collapse and one cannot find where to put one's hands to prevent the fall. My father, from the front row, stood up a half-second later. His face went from pride to panic with a speed that seemed grotesque to me. He froze as if hoping what was coming wasn't real. But it was, and it was inevitable. I loved you, Laura, I said, not raising my voice, but letting each word carry the weight of a sledgehammer. With every part of me. I trusted you with a faith I no longer even have in God. I saw the tears begin to well up in her eyes. She wanted to speak, but she couldn't. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, only short, gasping breaths, as if the air refused to enter her lungs. I turned towards my father. I didn't need to say his name. It wasn't necessary. His face already said it all. And you, Dad, I continued, you were my role model, my guide, the man who taught me to tell the truth even when it hurts, to keep my word even when it's hard, to be loyal, even when the world isn't. My voice trembled slightly when I said, Dad, but not from weakness, but from the wound. The wound that was opening like a gash in the middle of my chest. I didn't care that everyone was watching. In that moment, it was me, facing the two pillars of my life that had crumbled at the same time. The silence was total. Father Manuel's face was ashen, his hands clasped on his chest as if he were praying silently. The guests looked from side to side, some unsure whether to look away or hold their gaze. Many already knew. They had scanned the code, they had seen the images, but hearing me say it made it something different, irrevocable. Last night, I said, now with a more contained, almost surgical tone, I discovered that the two people I trusted most have been lying to me. They have been sharing more than just secrets. They shared a bed, a body, words I thought were exclusively mine. They planned to let me walk to this altar with a blindfold on and a noose around my neck. Some guests let out exclamations of disbelief, others brought their hands to their mouths. I saw Sylvia, Laura's sister, cover her face with both hands and sob. I saw David, my boss, shake his head, murmuring something to his wife. My cousin Andrea was crying openly. But I decided I wasn't going to make a private scene. I continued. No, this betrayal was meticulous, constant, silent, and public in its contempt. So the truth must also be public. It had to be born here, in front of everyone, like a flower blooming among ruins. I extended my hand and pointed to the attendees. You have already seen the evidence, messages, photographs, times, and places. There are no doubts, no possibility of confusion. There are only facts. Laura burst into tears, covering her face with her veil. Her body trembled. She took a step towards me as if to explain, but I didn't allow it. No, I said, lowering the microphone. No more empty words. My father tried to approach, taking a step between the pews, but my mother, Carmen, stood up before him. She planted herself in front of him, looking at him with a mixture of rage and despair rarely seen on a human face. She said nothing to him, just looked at him, and he stopped like a dog caught in the middle of a theft. This wedding is over, I said finally, looking at the priest. This ceremony is a funeral. But not mine. I turned my gaze to the central aisle, walked down it slowly, with my head held high, with measured steps, as if each one were a declaration of independence. Behind me, the church was an emotional crater, contained screams, sobs, accelerated murmurs. Laura was collapsing. My father was trying to talk to someone, anyone, who would still listen to him. But no one wanted to. The truth was a flame that was consuming everything. And I stepped out into the fresh air. The sky was clear. The October air was clean, cold, as if the universe wanted to reward me with a moment of clarity. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear or sadness. I felt something different. Freedom. Outside, the sounds of the city contrasted sharply with the silence I had left behind. The honking cars, the distant bells, the song of a street vendor, everything continued as if the world was unaware that mine had just exploded. I stepped down the church stairs slowly, feeling each step under my soles as if they were the last vestiges of the weight I had been carrying for months without knowing it. I stopped on the last step, just before the street, and looked ahead. No one was following me yet. Only the wind accompanied me, cool, almost compassionate. But I wasn't alone for long. Miguel, my best friend, came out behind me, still in shock. I saw him approach with quick, nervous steps, as if he didn't know whether to hug me or leave me in peace. "Juan," he exclaimed. "My God, I can't believe what I just saw. I still can't process it. Are you okay?" I looked at him. This man who had shared university drunken nights, sports defeats, and 3 a.m. talks about the meaning of life with me. He didn't have to pretend. With him, I could be honest. "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I replied. "The truth hurts, yes, but it also cleanses." Miguel hugged me without words. A simple, sincere gesture, full of a solidarity that needed no explanation. That hug, in the midst of the chaos, was an emotional anchor. Behind us, the church doors remained open. Some guests began to leave. Some were crying, others were murmuring among themselves, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Some still held their phones as if they couldn't let go, as if looking at those images one more time was the only way to process the horror. I saw Sylvia, Laura's sister, sitting on the steps with her head in her hands, devastated. No one was comforting her, no one knew how. And then my mother came out. The woman who gave me life walked slowly, but with her dignity intact. Her face was wet with tears, but her posture was firm. She approached me, said nothing, but took my hand tightly, a strength that said, "I'm with you. This doesn't define you. You will get through this." I looked at her. She nodded silently, and I felt something inside me, something broken, begin to reconfigure itself. The chaos fully erupted minutes later. Some guests confronted Laura, others surrounded my father with accusations, questions, looks of contempt. A tabloid journalist, infiltrated among the attendees, was already writing what would be a bombshell exclusive. I knew this would leave the walls of the church and explode like dynamite on social media. But I didn't care. Not anymore. And so it was. By that Saturday afternoon, the first videos and photos of the scene were circulating on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. A couple of attendees shared screenshots of the website containing the evidence. Some were indignant, others simply fascinated by the morbid curiosity. By Sunday morning, it was trending all over Spain, in WhatsApp groups, in talk shows, in relationship blogs. A thread on X, formerly Twitter, with screenshots and a timeline of events accumulated over 500,000 views in 12 hours. And on Monday, the calls began. Local media wanted to know more. TV shows offered me money for an exclusive interview. Some journalists contacted me with questions wrapped in silk gloves. How do you feel? What message do you want to give the world after such a revelation? One of them even dared to say, "You are a modern symbol of male emotional empowerment." I rejected almost all the offers. I wasn't interested in becoming a viral spectacle. But I agreed to talk to a journalist from El País, an old acquaintance who had covered tech topics about my company and who, above all, knew how to listen. I gave him a brief interview, without embellishments or melodrama. "I have no thirst for fame," I told him. "I just believe in the truth, and I believe people have the right to know who they are dealing with, especially when it comes to trust and integrity." My words were published without sensationalism, and that was enough for other media outlets to replicate them with respect. But not everyone came out unscathed. Laura was fired in less than a week. Her company, which boasted on its website about defending family values and ethical responsibility, couldn't afford the association with a scandal of that magnitude. Her image was tarnished, clients withdrew. The damage was irreversible. My father, for his part, faced something even worse, the collapse of a reputation built over 30 years. The word of mouth, the photos, the articles, it all contributed to some of his biggest clients canceling contracts. His lifelong partner, who had been with him through dozens of multi-million-dollar deals, broke off relations immediately. In a matter of weeks, he went from being a benchmark to being a name no one wanted to pronounce. And my mother did what few expected. She filed for divorce just 2 weeks after the incident. No shouting, no revenge, just a serene firmness that reminded me of myself. "It's not just what he did, Juan," she told me one night as we drank tea in her living room, surrounded by family photographs that no longer meant the same thing. "It's that he was capable of letting you walk to that church, knowing what he knew. That is something I can never forgive him for." The days that followed were a strange mixture of calm and storm. Calm inside me because the hardest step had already been taken, and storm outside because the world wouldn't stop talking about what had happened. Sometimes neighbors would greet me with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Other times, some acquaintances would send me ambiguous messages, wanting to know more, as if the pain could be dissected into chapters. But I didn't respond. I simply moved forward, step by step, as if my life were now a minefield I had to cross carefully, but without stopping. Everything related to the legal proceedings was handled by Rebecca Soto, my lawyer. She did it with the precision and tact of an emotional surgeon. She not only protected my assets and rights but also anticipated every attempt, however minimal, of contact or claim from Laura. The marriage, legally speaking, never took place, so there was no need for a divorce. But there was a long list of details to close: advance payments, reservations, invoices, gifts, and a whole emotional logistic that had been built by two people but financed by one. I had advanced more than 80% of the expenses, from the rental of the Museum of History to the jazz trio, from the flowers to the suite in Tenerife. And although I couldn't recover every euro, Rebecca negotiated solid agreements. Some suppliers were understanding, others offered partial refunds, but the most important thing was that Laura no longer had any way to claim absolutely anything. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement she herself signed without hesitation, confident that it would never be activated, all my assets were shielded. But in the end, the best defense was not a legal document, it was the truth and the dignity with which I chose to expose it. During that time, I never again responded to a single message from Laura. She wrote me long, desperate, incoherent emails. She called me dozens of times from different numbers. She even tried to contact my friends, my mother. Everyone ignored her, not out of revenge, but because there was nothing left to say. My father, on the other hand, took weeks to dare to seek me out. He did it first with timid attempts, empty messages, emojis, phrases like, "I need to talk to you," or, "Don't ignore me, son, please." But I didn't respond. I had no words. I didn't want answers because what he had done needed no explanation, it only deserved distance. Until one Saturday morning, weeks after that day in the church, he appeared at my apartment door. I recognized him by the shadow cast on the peephole. I hesitated to open, but I did. Not for him, for me. Because I needed to close that chapter without leaving any cracks open. He was thinner, with disheveled hair, dressed in casual clothes, a far cry from the impeccable suit of the exemplary father he had been. His eyes were sunken, empty. It was as if the years had suddenly piled up on his shoulders. "Son," he said, barely a whisper. "I know I can't ask you for anything, I know, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." I looked at him. For years, I had idealized him. I had put him on such a high pedestal that the fall was devastating. But now, in front of me, there was no longer the broken idol. There was only a man, a lost, repentant, and miserable man. And I felt something that surprised me. Pity. "I forgive you, Dad," I said, looking him in the eye. "Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry this anger any longer. It takes up space, it darkens me." He nodded, with tears in his eyes. He didn't try to hug me, he didn't ask for a second chance. He just nodded and left. I closed the door with a strange feeling, as if I had sealed a coffin, not his or mine, but that of the version of the past that needed to die so I could start over. And so I did. 3 months later, I accepted a job offer I wasn't even looking for. A tech company in Monterrey, Mexico, offered me a position as a senior director of artificial intelligence projects. An old colleague had recommended me. The salary was high, the conditions excellent, but what seduced me was not the money, it was the distance. I needed to escape Madrid, not because I was ashamed, not because I was running away, but because I wanted to breathe new air, to walk on streets where no one knew my story, where I could build a new one from scratch with the bricks that were still intact, my ability, my ethics, my instinct for reconstruction. Before leaving, I sold some belongings, donated others. I left the apartment in Salamanca with a mixture of relief and nostalgia. It was a beautiful space, but it was full of ghosts. I said goodbye to my mother with a hug that lasted for minutes. She asked me to take care of myself, not to close my heart completely, not to let the pain define me. "Not everyone is like them, son," she said in my ear. "There are still good people out there, and you deserve to find them." And with that blessing, I crossed the Atlantic. Monterrey welcomed me with a more direct sun, with a different rhythm, with imposing mountains that cut across the horizon like ancient scars on the earth. I didn't know anyone, and that, far from making me uncomfortable, offered me exactly what I needed: anonymity, possibility, a blank canvas. The work was demanding but stimulating, artificial intelligence projects that pushed the boundaries of automation in critical sectors. I immersed myself in it like someone who dives into icy water to forget the fire that has burned them inside. It wasn't an escape, it was a controlled pause, a necessary space to listen to myself again without the voices of the past whispering in my ear. My colleagues were kind, efficient, curious. They knew what they needed to know, that I came from Spain, that I had extensive experience in project management, and that my way of working was meticulous to the point of obsession. No one asked about my personal history, and I didn't offer more than what was necessary. But I didn't do it out of shame, I was simply learning to protect what was still whole. After a few weeks, I had a solid routine. I lived in a modern apartment in the San Pedro neighborhood with huge windows overlooking the Sierra Madre. I got up early, ran a few kilometers before starting my day. I read books at night, philosophy, science, Japanese fiction. And every Sunday afternoon, without exception, I sat down in front of the computer to write. I didn't know I needed to write until I did it. At first, they were disorganized notes, fragments, unanswered questions. Then they turned into letters I would never send, letters to my father, to Laura, to myself. And then, without realizing it, I began to write a kind of reconstruction diary. Each entry didn't talk about the pain, but about what came after, what one does with the remains, how the soul reorganizes itself when you can no longer go back. Sometimes I would walk through Fundadora Park, just listening to instrumental music. I would stop in the corners where I saw children playing or couples laughing, and I would feel a pang, yes, but also a kind of quiet hope, as if it were still possible someday to trust again. I started going out little by little. I joined a book club at an independent bookstore. We talked about Latin American authors, Borges, Mariana Enriquez, Cortázar. And there I met interesting people, unpretentious people who didn't look at me like a viral story, but like another human being going through their own process. One of them was Lucia. She was 36, worked in industrial design, and spoke with that slow cadence of someone who thinks before opening their mouth. We first shared readings, then coffees, then walks. Nothing more. Nothing that resembled love, but it did resemble genuine friendship, conversation that isn't heavy, silence that isn't uncomfortable. And that, at that moment, was all I needed. My mother wrote to me every week. She told me how her divorce proceedings were progressing, how she was renovating part of the apartment, how she had started playing the piano again after 20 years. In one of her letters, she said something that stuck with me: sometimes the deepest love isn't in saving the other person, but in saving ourselves when everything falls apart. Laura disappeared from my radar completely. I heard from a mutual friend that she had moved back in with her parents in Pamplona, that she had tried to find work at another agency without success, that she avoided social events, that she no longer appeared in photos on her social media. I didn't celebrate her fall, but I didn't mourn it either. She had chosen her path, and the price was visible. My father, according to my mother, now worked as a junior agent at a small real estate agency on the outskirts of Madrid, without prestige, without renown. He had tried to get back on his feet, but his name was now synonymous with betrayal in more than one circle. The relationship with Laura didn't survive a month after the scandal, perhaps because it wasn't love that united them, but the shadow of something forbidden that became unbearable when it was brought to light. Deep down, I knew they were both reaping what they had sown, but I no longer stopped to watch that harvest. I had too much ahead of me. The story of my interrupted wedding became an urban legend in some circles in Madrid. It was told at gatherings, at dinners, in conversations. Some used it as a warning, others as inspiration. It hardly occupied my thoughts anymore. What had been an open wound had become a scar, visible, yes, but without pain. Now I was living. Not surviving. Living. 6 months have passed since that day in the church, and although time doesn't erase what happened, it has an amazing ability to redefine what one feels when remembering it. I no longer dreamed of the betrayal, I no longer woke up startled, I no longer reviewed every conversation looking for clues. What was at first an obsession, understanding why, how, since when, faded away like mist at dawn. And not because I forgot, but because I learned. I learned that pain has no calendar, that you don't overcome it in neat phases, that sometimes you go backward just when you thought you had moved forward. But I also learned that not everything breaks forever, that there are parts of oneself that only awaken after the collapse. In Monterey, I found a version of myself I didn't know, freer, more conscious, lighter. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, not to my father, not to Laura, not even to myself. I no longer measured myself by my successes, or my romantic achievements, or the approval of others. I measured myself by my ability to get up, to look at the world without cynicism, to keep walking without hiding the scar. I started dating again, yes. Some were pleasant, others simply okay. I wasn't looking to fill a void, just to share the journey. Trust, I understood, was not a gift you give to others without reservation, but a plant that you water little by little, with small, consistent, honest actions. Lucia and I remained friends, nothing more, but every conversation with her was like a class in humanity. She taught me to listen without interrupting, to observe without judging. In a way, she was my first refuge in an unknown land. And sometimes the most important refuges don't come in the form of passion, but of peace. My mother traveled to visit me a few months later. We walked through the city center, through Rufino Tamayo Park, and had dinner at a restaurant where she tried cabrito al pastor for the first time. We laughed like we hadn't in a long time. And at one point, without needing to ask, she took my hand across the table and said, "Juan, I'm proud of you. Not for what you did that day, but for what you've done since." And I understood what she meant. The real courage wasn't facing the truth in front of everyone, it was having decided not to stay in that moment, not to live forever in anger, not to use resentment as a shield. It was having let go. I closed my reconstruction diary at the end of that year. The last entry read, "I was betrayed, yes. I was humiliated. But I was also awakened." Because when they take away everything you took for granted, you discover what truly belongs to you, your dignity, your ability to be reborn, your voice. The story of the interrupted wedding, the double betrayal, the public explosion, was left behind like an echo that no longer haunts me. Now, another story was beginning. A story without spectacles or QR codes, without hidden scripts, only with one promise, to live with truth, even if it hurts, to love with caution, even if it's hard, and to move forward with open eyes, even if the path is sometimes uncertain. Because if I learned anything, it's that the most devastating falls can be the beginning of the best transformations, that the darkest days are not the end, but the pause before rebirth. And that when one walks through hell with a lit soul, what remains is not the fire, but the light. If this story touched your soul, if you ever felt like your world was collapsing but you still moved forward, please like the video, share your experience in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, every day, we honor the strength that comes from pain and the courage to start over. Thank you for making it this far. See you in the next story.